Evolution series here. And for those of you returning from sessions 1 and 2, I want to thank you for coming back. And for those of you joining for the first time, you found the right place. So happy to have you. We have one more after this, session 4, 2 weeks from now, where we're going to put everything together in terms of a roadmap that you can share with your leadership moving forward. So in session 1, we named the problem. In session 2, we gave you the diagnostic. And today we're going to go deeper than either of those into a single place where the 50% of the AI value lives and where most organizations are stuck without necessarily knowing that. And that is in your people and the relationship with AI. So first, let's just see where we are in the arc of the AI evolution series. Session 1 was the deployment gap. We showed you the data. 88% of organizations have deployed AI. Roughly 5 have scaled it. And that 83-point gap between those two numbers is really the competitive ground that's being contested right now and where most leaders have yet to realize it. In session 2, this is where we went through the 3 X factors: people at 50%, technology at 20%, process at 30%. And that diagnostics explains why the same tools produced widely different outcomes across organizations that look otherwise very similar. And now today in session 3, we're going to go inside that 50%, specifically go inside the question of how your people relate to AI, because it's that relationship. Yes, I got a post on this earlier this week. I know it sounds weird, but it's a thing. It's your relationship with AI that determines how much value your organization captures. And then lastly, in session 4, 2 weeks from today, is where we put the whole framework together in terms of a roadmap where your leadership team can actually execute and produce. So here's the distinction that organizes this entire session. AI maturity is not about what your people do with AI, but it's how they relate with AI. So most organizations are really measuring the wrong things. They're counting seats, they're tracking prompts, and now they're looking at token usage. And all of this tells you basically how much AI is being used, but not necessarily how well, right? So organizations breaking through in 2026 figured out something the rest really haven't, and that the ceiling is not the tools. The ceilings is the relationship with your people with AI. Okay, so once you see that, kind of the whole game changes. It changes how you train, it changes how you measure, and how you lead, and how you hire, right? So all of it reorganizes around a different question. And that question is what we're going to spend the next 45 minutes or so discussing. So my hope is that when you leave after these 47 minutes or so, that you'll know what the 3 stages of AI maturity are. This isn't theory. It's patterns that you will recognize in your own team by the time you're having lunch. And you'll know which of the 2 transitions your people are stuck on, and you'll have specific techniques on how to help them move forward. They're not necessarily frameworks, but they're techniques that you can teach someone tomorrow or even this afternoon. So you'll understand why quality prompting has become a financial discipline, not a productivity question, a cost center that compounds and is going to continue to compound if you ignore it. And you'll walk away with 2 diagnostic questions you can use this week to read where your people stand on the maturity curve and yourself. All right, so that's the deal, and let's get right into it here. So here's the headline data on where AI actually is in knowledge work today. 38% of knowledge workers now use generative AI daily. And this is Gallup, February this year. 2 years ago, the same number was 11%. So the usage curve is literally a hockey stick, right? It's practically vertical on people's usage of AI. 65% of organizations report using generative AI in at least one business function. That was from McKinsey, the big global consulting firm, first quarter 2026. And mid-markets are basically tracking the same. 88% of HR leaders say their organizations have not realized significant business value from AI tools. That's again from Gartner of 2026. These are all relative, fresh off the presses numbers. So if we read those 3 numbers again, your people are using AI, your company has deployed AI, yet 9 out of 10 of you are not seeing the business value from it. And here's a number that helps explain why. A major study this year looked at AI maturity across organizations, and they found that most mature organizations have AI fully integrated into their workflows at a rate of about 27%. The least mature organizations are at 3, right? Same tools, same licenses, same frontier models, 9 times the integration at the top. And again, the tool isn't the gap. It's not a training budget gap. It's a relationship gap. And it's the one that most leaders aren't paying attention to. So if your organization is anchored at the bottom or finding yourselves at the bottom of that tier or even a little bit above it, right, the cost of staying there is going to compound every quarter. And we're going to come back to that in a few moments here. I'm going to be quoting some subject matter experts and thought leaders in the space here behind some of the research that we use to help draft and create our methodologies and engagement models with our clients. One is Jeremy Utley, and he teaches at Stanford's Business School. And he spent the last 3 years running field work on how people actually use AI inside of organizations. And his data is some of the best that we've seen. His finding is that roughly 90% of workers are capturing less than 10% of the value that's provided to them through AI, right? 90% less than 10%, right? And this isn't a failure of access. The people are logging in, they have the licenses, they have the subscriptions, and they're using the tool. What they haven't done or figured out is really how to work with AI, right? So they're spending time with it and they're exchanging messages with AI and they're comfortable around AI. Nothing's really actually happening, which brings me to what we actually call it, and that is the AI friend zone, right? These are your people are stuck in the AI friend zone. If we're using the concept of a relationship, right? I think we've all heard that terminology. Unfortunately, maybe some of us have found ourselves in that friend zone at some point in our lives, right? All of your folks are basically in the AI friend zone, right? So they're spending time with AI every day, right? It's productive on the surface, but it's really not moving the needle, right? It's not going anywhere, right? They are on paper in relationship with arguably the most powerful technology of our generation, and yet not much is happening. And that is the AI friend zone, right? AI is absolutely ready for more, right? And your people are the ones holding the relationship at arm's length, right? Because they're not aware of what the next stage could look like or how necessarily to get there, right? So a quick engagement moment, a show of hands or drop an indication in the chat if you think your organization may have landed your people in the AI friend zone. Definitely. All right, good stuff. So the AI friend zone is real, right? We're seeing people are saying, yes, definitely we're in that AI friend zone. So it's real and it has specific causes, right? And it has specific ways to get out of this AI friend zone. So we're going to spend the rest of our time together talking about how to get unstuck from this unfortunate situation. Before we go into the maturity model, I want to pause a few minutes here and reframe what we're actually talking about because something important has actually shifted in the economics of AI of the past 90 days. And most executives really haven't caught up to this yet. And so here's the rub, right? AI is definitely getting cheaper, but your AI bill is not, right? Both of those are true, and they are both true at the same time. Per token inference prices have fallen somewhere between 9 times to 900 times per year, depending on which performance benchmark you're measuring. And Gartner projects another 90% cost reduction by 2030. Yet enterprise AI spend has risen 320% over the same 2 year window, right? So the cost of intelligence is falling, but the cost of deploying intelligence is skyrocketing. And both of those statements are true. So the paradox really has consequences, and it's something that we really should be thinking about. So the average enterprise AI budget grew from 1.2 million per year in 2024 to 7 million in 2026, right? And that's from Analytics Week inference report that came out earlier this year. So some Fortune 500 companies are reporting monthly AI inference bills in the tens of millions of dollars, and that is monthly, right? So your budget is growing at the same rate, right? It's growing from a smaller base, right? But excuse me, it's from a smaller base, right? So going to be much harder to control in the near future if we don't build the discipline around this now. So that figure out cost discipline in this early phase, they're going to have a compounding advantage, right? The companies that let their bills grow without structure will wake up in 2028, some AI line that they can't necessarily explain to their board. I'll use our own experience here at AIX, for example. In 2025, we were seeing that costs, even at the pro level, weren't enough for the less sophistication and usage that we had. So we wound up going up to the max, right? So if you look at it, the entry point is about 20 a month per person. Where you're for some of our level folks and kind of the cutting edge. I mean, we're on the cutting edge of all of it. We're spending upwards up to $200 per month per person. And that represents for us about a 10 increase in our cost. Now, we knew that this was going to come. It came very quickly, but we could kind of see coming. So we were able to budget for that going into 2026. But you can imagine if that, was the business that we're in, right? If you're a company where it's not your business, but you need to use AI to gain a competitive advantage, how, right, if you're not knowledgeable about this, how it can really sneak up on you. So the next slide here is where Gartner issued a warning to chief product officers last month, right? This is all kind of press's information here, but last month, and it applies to every senior leader, who's in the room with us right now. And it's basically your CPOs who mask architectural inefficiencies with cheap tokens today are going to find and start applying agentic architecture to this. It's going to grow exponentially, right? So the translation is if you use cheap AI pricing to paper over bad practices or architecture, you're building technical debt that you might not be able to repay when the prices start to normalize and start to adjust and increase over time here. So they will normalize. These venture-backed subsidies of cheap inferences are going to end. And when it ends, the companies that have built the right habits now are going to be able to continue to scale. The companies that built on cheap tokens without discipline are going to hit a wall, right, and find themselves in a tough situation. So there's four things that are driving the cost explosion here. One is agentic workflows, right? So every agentic task triggers between 10 and 20 separate LLM calls, not one, right? Two, retrieval augmented generation, RAG architectures. This inflates your context windows 3 to 5 times. And then three, always on monitoring. These agents, they consume compute 24 hours a day, whether anyone is really looking at them or not. Four, the hidden cost, and we're going to talk about this here, but there's a hidden cost of poor Gen AI strategy and why we spend 50% of our focus on people, right? People in their relationship with the technology. And this is by no fault of their own, right? So your people, they don't know any better. They are experimenting, and by the nature of experimentation, they're wasteful prompts, right? So if we don't get ahead of that and start educating them and evolving them through the AI evolution cycle here, right, this is going to scale. It's scaling every day. So every wasteful prompt is generating an avoidable token cost. And so that fourth factor, prompt quality, it stops being a productivity issue and it starts becoming a line item on your income statement. So here's the math. Prompts reduce token usage by 40 to 70% compared to native prompting, right? The old school way. I mean, as 2025, the way folks are prompting, it is very inefficient. Combined with output format discipline, the total savings can land anywhere from 50 to 80% range. And so for organizations spending about 10 grand a month on API calls, that's about 5,000 to 8,000 per month in savings, or 60 to almost $100,000 a year from the same work product, from the same people, from a better practice, right? So scale that, imagine this, right? Scale that across 500 knowledge workers, each running hundreds of queries per day, and prompt quality becomes a six or a seven figure budget line, which is why I want to close this section with a sharp line that anchors, we're going to talk about. And that is cheap tokens made sloppy prompting feel free, right? And it never was free. We just weren't the ones who were paying for it, right? So that's the economic frame and where this is going to be heading relatively soon. So everything from this point forward, it's about building the people side of the capability that has been the competitive discipline with now financial stakes associated with them. And so I want to start with a story. And if you were with us last week, it may seem redundant, but it's definitely worth repeating. In 2005, a freestyle chess tournament was being held where players could use any combination of humans and chess engines, any hardware, any software, any collaboration model, right? And the favorites coming into this were your grandmaster chess players paired up with supercomputers, right? And that makes sense, right? Because you have top human talent, you have the top hardware. That's your logical, excuse me, your logical choice to win. The reality is they didn't win. Two amateur chess players won using ordinary home computers running publicly available chess engines, and nobody heard of these guys. They called themselves, they were a team of two guys, Zach S. and Gary Kasparov, the world champion who lost to IBM's supercomputer Deep Blue in 1997. He wrote about this afterwards. And his analysis is what made the story famous. He expected the grandmasters plus the supercomputers to be unstoppable, and it wasn't. This is what Kasparov concluded in his own words: a weak human plus a machine plus a better process is superior to a strong human plus a machine with an inferior process. And so the reality is Zach S. didn't win because they did it with AI. They won because it was how they related to it, right? And that's the distinction in this whole session. Hold this in your mind for the next 10 minutes or so, because we're going to walk through what relationship actually looks like at the three different levels of our maturity model. So here's the map. We have our three stages. We have tool user, thought partner, and co-intelligence, right? So the tool user says, I use AI to find things, right? And that's a search relationship. Thought partner says, AI helps me produce things, right? And that's a production relationship. Co-intelligence says, I think with AI, and that's a thinking relationship. Now I'm going to sound like a fifth grade school teacher. It's the propositions that are doing a lot of the work here in these statements, right? I use AI. AI helps me. I think with AI, right? And each one is a different relationship, and each one produces a radically different result, right? So over the next 10 minutes, we're going to walk through each one of these stages in detail, what each one looks like, how it feels, what it produces, where people plateau, and most importantly, what percentage of your people are probably operating at these stages right now. So let's take a quick look at stage one, tool user. Mode is a one-way interaction, right? It's a search mindset. The person asks a question, AI returns an answer, the person moves on. Behavioral examples of this are, key points in this document. Write me an email about this meeting. Find me data on market trends, right? It's a short prompt. It's a finished product request, minimal context, no iteration. Take the first output as the answer, right? Approximately 85% of AI users in most organizations operate at this level today. And this isn't a judgment, right? I mean, the starting point for almost everyone, and the value captured at this stage is roughly only 10% of what AI can actually do. Now, I want to be clear about something. The user mode is not wrong. There are legitimate transactional tasks that you want a quick answer on, and you should move on with your day, right? Like you can just ask it a quick question and move on. And the problem is the use of the user mode. The problem is that they never leave it, right? So there's nothing wrong with that mode, but you never progress beyond that. They treat the tool user mode as the ceiling when actually this is the floor, right? They don't know any better because no one really actually showed them, above or what's possible. So next we have stage two, and this is thought partner. Your thought partner mode is again one-way directed, but with context engineering, right? The human provides a rich background, AI produces a deliverable, and the human refines the output. Behavioral examples, they sound a little different, right? Here is the context of our customer segment. Their concerns, the stakes of us getting this wrong. Draft a proposal outline that addresses their implementation timeline concerns and uses the tone that we established in last quarter's communication. Or analysis, identify the gaps in my knowledge, or excuse me, in my logic, and then suggest how we can strengthen the weakest points of that. So you notice what's happening. The human is still doing the cognitive work up front, right? They're framing the role, they're providing context, they're specifying the output, but AI is amplifying the human's thinking, not. Harvard Business School ran a study with Boston Consulting Group consultings on this exact mode, and the results are notable. 12% of tasks were completed. 12% more tasks were completed, 25% faster with 40% higher quality, right? So this isn't a improvement, this is a step function, right? So here's the key point. This is where most organizational productivity gains are realized from AI right now. And it's also where most of your people are plateauing, right? They get to the thought partner, they start seeing productivity lift, and they stop climbing. And it's because the next stage requires something fundamentally different, and we haven't not given them the language or the techniques to make the next move. And so this is stage three. It's co-intelligence. This is where the relationship completely changes. Co-intelligence is bidirectional, right? It's exploratory, it's emergent. The human and AI challenge each other's assumptions. They challenge their biases, right? They generate insights that neither one could produce alone. The prompts sound different, right? You go into it with, have a hunch that our expansion approach is backward, or that we should contract before we expand. Help me explore why I might be feeling this way. Challenge my assumptions, challenge my biases, find the blind spot that I'm missing, right? And you go even further and you can upload content, additional context with artifacts, spreadsheets, documents, right? Asking these types of questions, right? These bidirectional interactions. Next one could be, that you gave me is pretty interesting. What lead if we follow it further? What happens if we take it three moves beyond where we are today? Who should I be talking to in our organization? Or what should I be researching that I haven't thought of just yet? Right? So these are the hallmarks of a co-intelligence session that are specific and recognizable, right? The insights surprise both parties. You're making connections that the human nor AI anticipated going into. You enter a flow state, right? People describe these sessions as energizing, right? It's not necessarily work, it's a meaningful and thoughtful and purposeful conversation. They often lose track of time where, it could seem like 20 minutes, right? So this is rare ground, and this is where about 5% of your employees in most organizations, they're at that level today, right? And those who do report something different from productivity, they report that AI has changed how they think and not merely what they produce, right? So this is a completely different category and outcome. And the organizations that are winning in 2026 are quietly building towards this one person at a time. So here's the acid test, right? This is the acid test for what separates the three stages cleanly. Okay. Can you and AI create insights together that neither of you could have created alone? Right? Think of your last three AI interactions this week and ask yourself that question. If AI found something that you asked for, then that was your user, right? The insight was yours. AI just located the data. If AI helped you produce a better version of something you directed, that was thought partner, right? The insight was still yours, but AI just enhanced the output. If you and AI generated something that surprised both of you, something neither of you could have reached alone, that's co-intelligence, right? So most leaders who try to try this exercise honestly, discover that they're operating at that thought partner mode. And most of the time, and that co-intelligence is almost never happening, right? So this is hopefully useful information to you. So if you're leading your organization towards an AI evolution, right? I'm going to quote John Maxwell here. You cannot take people where you have not been, and you cannot teach what you don't know, and you cannot give what you do not have, right? So it's very important that you, as leaders, take it upon yourselves to move through this evolution, this model, and the use cases and the application of AI, right, through tool user, through thought partner, and ultimately to co-intelligence to set the direction and set the example for your people. I'm going to lift something from Ethan Mollick, who don't know who he is. I totally recommend that you into his work. He's actually authored a book called Co-Intelligence, and it's some of the best research in the space. So if you're not reading his work, I would suggest you start. He has a ton of information on YouTube and online also, but his book Co-Intelligence is really what inspired and Moloch talks about the difference between centaurs and cyborgs. Now, okay, his terms, we don't use those terms. If you see this guy online, you'll totally understand why he's using these terminologies. He's a very fan. Anyway, I digress. Centaurs divide tasks, right? They hand someone some of the work to AI and they keep other work for themselves. The cyborgs blend, they weave AI into their thinking at a lower level. And that line between human cognition and AI cognition, it gets harder to draw that cleanly, right? The centaurs are the thought partners, the cyborgs are moving towards co-intelligence. Moloch also coined the phrase that I'd like for you to take home. I was actually at an event at MIT yesterday, an AI symposium, and this was actually used times, which shows me that he's definitely on the forefront of thought leadership in the space. So again, another tip of the hat to Ethan. But he calls it the jagged frontier. And AI effectiveness varies dramatically across tasks in ways that aren't necessarily intuitive, right? So it can totally crush one task for you, right? That you expected it to struggle with. It can crush it for you and can actually be something that you would expect it to struggle with, but it handles it very nicely. And it can fail at some other tasks that you thought was really trivial and that it should be able to do hands down, right? So the map and the capabilities of the toolings, it's jagged, right? He calls that the jagged frontier. That is changing literally weekly now with these models, right? You have Claude coming out with their latest features. I believe OpenAI just released an image generator that now competes with Google. Google's Nano Banana was the cream of the crop. It came out late quarter of 25. Blue Doors, it was like a quantum leap above everybody else. Well, here we are in April going into May, and now you have OpenAI, which has an arguably better model than Google, right? So this is the way it's going. It's happening very, very. So incumbent upon you, and we're going to talk about this later, is that yes, you have to know what the jagged frontier is, but this is almost changing daily. Break and check in on a weekly basis, right? So this also explains the old way of doing things within where we would create playbooks and standards and guidelines, right? That are often very rigid. This means your playbooks are going to fail, right? They're going to become obsolete almost the day that you print them. So the people who win with AI are the people who develop the judgment now in the moment, which deliverable is within the inside of its capabilities, right? So this is the judgment that we're going to turn to next because the gap between the stages is not necessarily knowledge, but it's practice in your relationship with the tool. So let's talk about the transitions between the various stages, right? We have two transitions, two thresholds. Each one has a characteristic barrier and a set of specific techniques that help move people across to next level. So the first threshold is tool user to thought partner. And the barrier is that search mindset, right? Techniques are about context, framing, and iteration. The second threshold is thought partner to co-intelligence. And the barrier here is the deliverable mindset, right? The techniques are about volume, perspective, and exploration. And so I'm going to walk you through these thresholds and details with techniques that your people can use tomorrow if you bring it to them. And to that end, I'm going to show you the tools and techniques that I use with my own practice on a daily basis as a lived example, of what, maturity level looks like inside of an executive's daily workflow. Okay, so the first threshold is the search mindset. And Jeremy Utley and his co-author, Key and Ohar, call it the tyranny of search. I love that term, the tyranny of search, right? The interface looks like Google, and humans have been trained for 25, I can't believe it, 25 years to type short little questions, expect a finished answer, right? So the muscle memory is strong, and it takes a deliberate effort and focus to rewire this, right? So there are 4 techniques that can help you people move past this. The first technique is context saturation. Utley's rule, and this is the one that I want you to think about a lot today, is never prompt without at least 400 words of context. You want to define the role, the objective, the situation, the stakeholders, the constraints, what a good answer looks like, right? What that outcome, what the definition of good is or success is. And you're probably asking yourself, holy mackerel, 400 words, 400 words. And so this is the logic behind it and the science behind it. The effort of assembling that type of context forces the cognitive engagement to break through tool user mode, right? You can't write 400 words of context without really thinking hard about what you actually need, right? So let me give you a little bit of coaching on the 400 word frame because we're going to come back to this. It will back to almost every technique that we're covering today. When you prompt AI with less than 400 words of context, you're asking it to guess what you want, right? And AI is very, very good at guessing and pattern recognition. And so it will produce a plausible answer, right, that fits your vague request. But the answer is plausible, but it might not necessarily be right, right? You won't necessarily see the difference because the output looks very polished, right? And there's behind that, and perhaps that's another series outside of this. But when you prompt with AI with 400 or more words of context, you're telling it what you want, and the output quality changes from plausible to useful. And so and here is what matters most for your leaders. The room here is that the 400 word rule is not a preference, right? It's a performance threshold. The data on this is very, very, people who hit the threshold get dramatically better output. And the people who don't, right, there's really very little middle ground. The difference between the two is drastic. So if you teach your people one thing from this session, you want to talk to them about breaking that cognitive lock and using that 400 word rule. The second technique, this is structured prompting frameworks. Your people need one that they can remember under pressure. This is one called CRIT. It comes from Jeff Woods. CRIT stands for context, role, interview, task. And context is the 400 words we talked about. The role is telling AI who to be, act as my chief AI officer, chief of staff, act as a skeptical board member, act as a senior strategist in the insurance industry, right? The task is what you want produced. So the innovation in CRIT is the interview step, right? Before AI produces anything, you ask it, you explicitly invite it to ask you clarifying questions one at a time. And this organizes the entire interaction. So AI stops guessing and it starts interviewing, right? So you stop dumping context and start being interviewed. The output quality on the other side of this interview step is noticeably higher than the output of the quality without it, right? So we're kind of here. Woods built CRIT specifically for executives who don't want to memorize the 12-step prompt frameworks from 2024 and 2025. It's 4 letters, it's 4 moves. You can teach it once and people will be able to use it for, he said, years. I'm going to say maybe months or maybe a year until something else better comes, which I'm going to show you right now. The third technique, right? If CRIT feels like too much to remember, here's a one-line version. Single sentence you can append to the prompt and it does 80% of the work for you. Before you answer, right, you can say, before you answer, ask me 3 to 5 questions you need answered before you give me a useful response. Ask them one at a time and wait for my reply before moving on. I have my own version of this where I say, you can ask me up to 3 to 5 questions, one at a time. You have to make sure to say one at a time because it'll ask you all of them at once and you won't be able to, with it. So you say, ask me 3 to 5 questions, one at a time to gain the greater clarity and understanding to achieve the objective or result, right? Or objective or result. I use that on almost every one of my prompts, right? Where it makes sense to do that. And it goes in directions and areas that it hit all the blind spots. You can be as clear and concise as you think you possibly are, and it will start asking you questions that you didn't even think of, right? And that's where you start getting into that flow state and that conversational bidirectional level with AI and start moving from thought partner, right, into the co-intelligence. So I use this one every day. I use it when I'm lazy. I use it when I'm tired. I use it when I have a vague hunch and I don't have the time to build 400 words of context, right? And this is the meta prompt that does most of the context building for me. So I think this one in particular, the 400 word prompt, yes, it's applicable, but I go to this most of the time. I use the 400 word as much as I can to give it the proper context, right? So we're efficient with our prompting and our token usage. So anyway, use this as an executive, use it with your teams, and I'd love to hear back from you in a month or two and tell me how it's kind of juice in relationship with AI. Okay, so now fourth technique, iteration over precision. This is a coaching phrase you must teach your people. It's huge, right? The first output is the draft. It's never the answer, right? So let's all say this out loud, say it to your team, place it on post-it notes or even in the coffee room or the cafeteria, right? The first output is a draft. It's never the answer. Two users take the first output as the answer. Thought partners treat it as a draft and iterate. The single reframe moves more people across the first threshold than any other technique, right? And so here's the enabling condition that makes it all possible. And it's very important. It's psychological safety, right? It's creating that environment of experimentation, the okay to fail, right? That sort of thing, right? So Amy Edmondson at Harvard Business School had spent 25 years showing us that psychological safety is a prerequisite for innovation. And what we're talking about here is democratizing innovation, right? Expanding the cognitive load, the creative capacity of your people, the collective intelligence of your organization. You need to create a safe psychological environment that is primed and ready to go for innovation. Without it, your people are not going to iterate, right? And they won't push back and they will not expose their half-formed thinking to a tool if they're afraid their manager is going to one day audit that, right? So here's the question for all of you guys, right? Do you people iterate with AI in front of each other, or do they do it behind closed doors? Are they sharing lessons learned and more importantly, the failures, right, with each other openly? If the answer is they do it behind closed doors, right, your people are going to stay as a tool user and be at the most basic levels at that 10% use of the capability of the tool, right? Because the tool user is the least exposing stage, right? And if you have an unsafe environment, the least exposing, right? The least exposure that you persons look for, it's more self-preservation than anything. So it becomes self-preservation versus innovation, which is really what we're looking for. So before I move to the second threshold, I want to flag another thing about the interface that almost no one's really talking about. And this is a game changer. It's been a game changer for me and my clients when we start introducing this. And it's it's the keyboard. It's the keyboard as part of the ceiling. Stanford's Human Computer Interaction Lab ran a study in 2016 that found speaking is approximately 3 times faster than typing, right? Speaking composition speed is 150 words per minute. Typing composition speed is 19 words per minute. IBM reported on this in 1999, and the number has not moved ever since, right? So do the math on that 400 word rule that we were talking about. Typing your 400 words of context takes almost 20 minutes. Speaking your 400 words of context takes 2.5 minutes, right? Most of your people are trying to reach that thought partner through a keyboard, right? That's like having a Model T interface on a jet engine. They're not stuck because they're lazy or unskilled. They're stuck because the input method makes the thing you're asking them to do really laborious. So we want to remove as much friction as we can so we can get that flywheel going with innovation, right? And getting them through breaking these various thresholds. So the cognitive load argument makes this worse, right? Research from 2000, right, 26 years ago, showed that the same cognitive resources used in problem solving are consumed by the mechanical act of typing. Let me read that for you. The same cognitive resources used in problem solving are consumed by the mechanical act of typing. So when your people type, they compose at half the time they think. And when they speak, they compose at the speed at which they think, right? So if you want your people to reach thought partner, teach them to use voice mode, right? This is the single highest leverage technique that you can make. Okay. The threshold, thought partner to co-intelligence. The barrier here is subtle, right? Deliverable mindset plus something called the Stillig effect, right? The island Stillig effect. This is a cognitive bias first documented in the 1940s. Okay. It's the human tendency. Stick with me here. Stick with me. I can't see you, but I'm feeling the eyes rolling here. Please. The tendency for humans, right, to settle for good enough as quickly as possible, right? That's the effect that was documented in 1940. The human tendency to settle for good enough as quickly as possible. That's to stop searching the moment we find something workable, even when something much better is still out there. And this is where it's very, very, right? AI amplifies this. Remember, we were talking about the output being plausible and it looks good because it's formatted in a certain way and it's communicated in a something way. It feeds right into this, right? So AI amplifies this bias. AI arrives at good enough faster than humans can do on our own and that we ever have in our history, right? Which lets humans stop thinking sooner, right? Utley and Gohar documented this empirically, right? Teams given AI often performed worse at innovative tasks than their teams without AI. And it wasn't because AI made them dumber, it was because AI made it easier for them to stop searching, to stop exploring, and to stop innovating, right? So the five techniques that follow are specifically designed to counter this and to force volume and explanation before they come to a conclusion. Okay, blow through some of these decks because we are at the 45-minute mark. I'm going to share these with you. This is going to be recorded. You can see it on YouTube. But let's get to the Marty King stack here. I'll give you an example of how I'm using the tools here. This is a lived example of my co-intelligence tools and techniques. This is my stack. It's 4 steps. I developed it over a couple of years and in past months with some of these tools coming out here because it works. These are, it's just tools and techniques, right? So step 1 is Whisper Flow. It's a product called Whisper Flow. It's a voice AI dictation tool that captures my stream of consciousness at that 150 words per minute without the cognitive overhead of typing. And this is where I get the most context out of my head, right? And basically it takes out all the filler words, it cleans up what I'm trying to say and actually formats it in a concise way. The next thing I do is I drop it into Grammarly, which is a grammatical AI tool, which then helps me clean up, right, the raw voice that I am producing it, and it refines it and it structures it, and I have it tooling it and tweaking it to be specifically used within a large language model or frontier model. And it adds detail to it. I'm able to kind of a little bit more there. So this is where the prompt quality discipline is in action, and my token efficiency and output and quality, it goes up exponentially. And then lastly is Claude. I send it to Claude from Anthropic. I choose Claude deliberately for its reasoning depth, its long context handling, and its willingness to push back on unclear prompts. Claude is my thinking partner, and it's not necessarily a tool preference, but it's a relationship choice. I've used all of the tools and I've just gravitated towards that because the way I work and the way it works, it really jives with me, right? So you may find that OpenAI might do it for you, or from XAI, or even Google, so step 4. And step 4, and this is almost the most important step, I simply ask it, do you understand what I'm looking for or what I'm saying, right? So this is a verification move. Right before Claude generates anything substance for me, I ask it to show me what it heard. And so this, if the statement is wrong and the prompt is wrong, I fix it before I spend another 3,000 tokens on a well-crafted answer, on question, right? So these are 3 principles underneath the stack. I capture thinking when it's fresh. I voice it out first, and I start typing second. I refine it before you send. The prompt quality is a financial discipline, not necessarily a luxury. And you want to verify it before you generate. Ask the model to show what you heard. This is an awesome relationship building exercise because it's showing you its logic as it's producing, right, the paraphrase of what it understands what you're asking of it, right? And I'm learning how this thing thinks, how it's behaved, its logic flow, and it allows me, right, to adjust how I communicate and relate to it. And again, I'm using relationship techniques here to improve my relationship with AI, right? So I do not prompt. I have a conversation, and the conversation starts with me speaking out loud, and it moves through a refinement pass, lands at Claude, and does not produce anything until Claude confirms with me that it heard me correctly, right? So this isn't a tool stack, it's a relationship. We did talk about mastery. I am coming up on the 10-minute mark here, guys. I really want to see if we can afford time to each other. We talked about this last time, but mastery, basically, this is it, right? You need to have fluency, each one of the modes, your thought tool, you partner up to co-intelligence, right? And how to work with each one of those modes. The discernment is knowing when to use those modes, depending on what you're looking to accomplish, right? Co-intelligence isn't going to apply to everything. There's going to be times when tool use is going to be and the right thing to do, and as his thought partner, right? So it's once you have that fluency, you have that discernment on when to be able to apply those techniques, and then adaptation, learning at the speed of AI, right? Continuous learning, it's non-negotiable now, right? Your highly intelligent practitioners, if they stay stagnant, they're going to lose. You, who may not have the expertise that they have, but know how to use AI and be able to stay ahead of the curve, you're going to blow doors on them, right? So that's that. Human goes across all of it. We are always in control. We are totally accountable for our output and the decisions we make. We never abdicate and we never outsource it to the tool. All right. So enough on that. We've got counterfeits here. We've got that. And if you go back to this as a reread, this is a big question here, right? The human capital test. If AI disappeared tomorrow, would you be more capable or less? We want to walk away from our use of the tool as an amplification that leaves us in a better condition than where we were before, right? Dependency on this leaves nothing. You actually atrophy, right? So at the end of the day, it's humans decide, AI amplifies. I get into flow state here. We'll talk about that. You can talk about that later. But basically, this is it in a nutshell, right? Do your people come from these exercises energized or exhausted, right? So the tool user is often tired. It's transactional work that drains people. The thought partner, they're satisfied. It's productivity, right? It sustains people. Co-intelligence energizes. It's a work that leaves people looking forward to the next session. 2 hours feels like those 20 minutes that we talked about earlier. The insights that surprised everybody in the room, right? If your people are not finishing the AI sessions energized, if they're not losing track of time, if they're not reporting that something surprised them, that they have not, then they have not crossed the threshold into co-intelligence. The flow is the signal, right? You want to name it, you want to watch for it, and you want to predict the conditions that produce it. Okay. Actions this week, again, we want to be able to map the distribution over time. Your leadership, you want them in that partner, definitely in that co-intelligence space, and you want to have that tide lift all ships. Okay. And then lastly here, we are finishing up. You want to be a learn-it-all and not a know-it-all, and that's coming from the CEO from it's a great term that I love. This is the end of this session here. We have about 8 minutes. I'll stay to answer your questions, but right, first session, we named the problem. The second session, we gave you the diagnostic. Today, we went deep into your people journey. In 2 weeks today, we're going to session 4, where we put it all together into a framework and hopefully a roadmap that you can use or share with your leadership that really makes a difference in your organization. So with that said, I'm going to shut it down and go to full screen and answer any questions you have. Thanks. I know it was like drinking from a fire hose here, but I hope you found it valuable, and I'm happy to answer the calls here. So what we're going to do in the Q&A section here, you can ask me questions and we'll go ahead and answer those live here. All right, I have a question from Todd Kamens. What is your thought on creating an org that is capable to work with AI before jumping right into the tools? So I think creating an org, or maybe like a department, that's what they're talking about, right? An operating model. What's your thought on creating an operating model capable of working with AI? Well, you definitely want to do that, right? I think your leaders, like I was saying earlier, your leaders have to have a level of competency and experience their own maturity, experience that maturity journey, and get to that highest level of co-intelligence, right? So that they're able to kind of gender and set the vision for the organization. What you want to do, we talked about this in the last session, is is grouped up with different from different generations, right? You have your Gen X's or millennials and your Gen Y's, and they all have certain levels of aptitude within AI. You want to identify your champion, like it's all old school OCM techniques here, but you want to identify who your champions are, right? And where they're coalescing in those areas within your organization and departments that may lend themselves to being the proving ground for some of this stuff. So what we wanted is to democratize, right, knowledge, to democratize these tools, put it in the hands of your people for a period of time, and let the cream rise to the top and identify who those people are and identify them as the champions. Then we want to start coalescing that into what we call eventually you want to get to a point where you have leadership, you have the lab, and you have the crowd, right? You have those folks that are really, really good at stuff, that have technical aptitude. You might have people, you'll definitely have people from IT there, but you want to have people from a cross section of the organization coming in as the lab, more or less the clearinghouse for what you're looking to accomplish, right? So they set the kind of the this playing field. They fertile ground for creativity, for your people to have that safe environment to work within. And through the democratization of it, you're putting in the hands of your people, they're coming to you with their ideas, right? And it goes through this clearinghouse where now you can start coalescing these and saying, okay, what are really good for pilots? What can we start hardening and start putting into production within our organization? What parts of our group that we want to take a laser focus on and totally change how we operate as a company with these newfound capabilities and capacity with the relationship of our employees and AI. So sorry for a long-winded answer there, but I hope I answered it. Any other questions? Okay, in this one. Oh, Nicole Kudo. Oh, she has a nice little comment for me. Liking the analogy of human relationships, and that the one's relationships with AI, especially asking the tool to reframe and restate the issue before any work takes place. Yep. Yeah, again, it's right. What level are the next sessions going to cover? Okay, so I would assume that this is kind of more, strategic. You guys would be if you want something more specific in terms of hard tools and techniques you can start using right away and maybe bring to your teams. Perhaps that's another session. Feel free to reach out to me directly, and we can see what we can do for that. But what level of the next session is going to cover? We're going to give you enough information so you can start using and craft. We'll start using the tools and then start crafting your strategy. Start getting to those levels. That's where we can have some one-on-one conversations on what that's going to look like. But the session is going to cover how we go about the strategy and where there's we examine, we do current state, we have AI explore, execute, and AI expand, right? So examine is we're examining, you want to examine the current state of your organization, right? It's that organizational readiness where you're putting that into practice within hardcore methodologies and models, and identifying what's right. And then we go ahead and we what's possible with AI, and that's where we start drafting for uplifting the capabilities of your people, identifying the right tool, and then identifying the right processes to start looking at good candidates for process reengineering or improvement. And then we get into the piloting and how you go about executing those within the organization, using the feedback loops to continuously refine that. And then you have expand, which is staying at the speed of AI evolution, that you have to stay abreast of that and some of the things you need to put in place so you know what that is, and then be able to refine what your strategy is. We talk about refining the strategy, or at least looking at your strategy on a monthly basis, at the very least a quarterly basis, due to the speed at which things are changing right now. Okay. Well, a lot of nice in here. I appreciate it, folks. It feels good. I don't see your faces, and they have these things muted, so to see you write these things is gold for me. So I appreciate it. My Flori Pendergast, no question. Just wanted to say thank you. I really enjoyed these sessions and have a lot of ideas that I want to bring back to my team. Awesome. That's what it's all about, guys, right? I mean, everybody's struggling, or maybe not struggling, but really on how all of this stuff can be applied. We've been at it for a while, so the idea is, listen, if we can help you guys out right now, just get your heads around it and get some momentum within your organization. That's ultimately what we want to do. The idea is that we're a friend in the industry, right? And when you get to a point where you may need some help, you give us a call, right? So, but now it's all about just giving back to the community, helping out, friends at new places and some new roles, and who have been elevated to be responsible for the types of initiatives in their companies. That's what it's all about. So really, really appreciate it. All right, I have a question here. Great session. Can you speak to the balance needed between a couple of topics covered today? Cost less than optimized approach, a more detailed and iterative balance. Yeah, I think that might be one I can answer offline, and I'll publish it to the team. There's a lot to it. It's nuanced. I mean, I want people to experiment, right? And they're not going to be the most efficient. So as a leader, you have to start looking at, ways to forecast the cost of innovation and really elevating the level of your organization. And right now, right, a lot of it's just like, hey, we buy the licenses, that's fine. You have these larger companies, the large ones, your 500s and up that have the resources to spend the money, they're out the hard way. And as us, Fortune 1000s or upper mid markets, we have the benefit of learning from their lessons and mistakes, right? So there are definitely ways to forecast what you're going to cost as you start elevating your level and innovation with the tools. But again, I can talk to that later. I'm not skipping it, but we've got a little bit of time here and there's a couple more questions. Okay, great. Greg, we'll catch up with you after that. We can go deep on that. And if there's any other questions that you folks have right now, I think we're at the tail end of it. If you have any more questions or comments, you have my email address. Hit me up directly, and we'll definitely spend some time to answer those. And if you want to set up a call, reach out. You have my information. So again, thanks, and we'll 2 weeks. If you haven't already, tell your family and friends about it. Invite them to the party. All right. Have a good one. We'll see you soon. Bye bye.